So the Chamber of Secrets has been reopened. Enemies of the air, beware. Jeans, this is your favorite one, right? I think it's my favorite too. I like the movie of the Half-Blood Prince because of all of the like comedy built in with the love interests and everything, but I really like the story of this one. I think it's my favorite. Is it anyone else's favorite?
Is it because you like that good-looking blonde guy?
Sex
That's what a lot of women are drooling over.
The flim flam man.
Oh, Lockhart.
What did you think we were talking?
I don't know. Lockhart, yes, I swoon over Lockhart. Did that man, the actor himself, the human, he directed an Avengers movie, I think.
Okay.
And so I saw an internet meme that said he directed, I don't know, let's say Avengers, or did he? Because maybe he just made the brain of the person who did and took credit for it.
It's adorable to see all these top Shakespearean actors in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So that's how they got famous first, was on the stage.
Yeah.
My favorite is what is this called name? Snake?
It's
Snake. I call him Snake. He's my very favorite.
Is he?
Yes. Because he played in a Robin Hood
Yeah.
movie as well.
Ah,
And he was the bad sheriff. He was such a stinker.
yeah. So, we have a lot to unpack from this one related to many different kinds of topics. One thing I don't want us to forget talking about today is Quidditch, because we didn't get to talk about Quidditch last week at all. And there's quite a bit of Quidditch that happens in this one, and it's all kind of enveloped with classism and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get into those topics too, but definitely let's not forget to talk about Quidditch today, because it played a big part in last book, but we ran out of time. So at the opening of the Chamber of Secrets, we didn't talk about the very ending last time, but it carries into today. Harry received that book from Hagrid with all the photos of Hagrid's collection that he gathered up of all of Harry's parents and memories for Harry to have. What did you guys think of that? And if you've read the book, who's read the books in addition to the movies? No, just watch the movies a lot. Yeah. And I want to know, because I want to include things that came from the movies mostly, but then when there's something that could be richer for discussion, I'll throw in book things too. But that happens in both. But what do you think of Hagrid's relationship with Harry and what that says about that, with how he gathers up all those pictures? What do you guys think?
Like a close uncle, he really has a heart for Harry, because he got to carry him when he was a baby and be his protector.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hagrid was also the first person who actually showed Harry any type of kindness.
Yeah.
You know, he took him away from what was a horrible situation.
He was kind of a father figure. There are many in the show, but he was one of them to Harry.
Probably Harry's first family album, right?
Yeah.
The first time he had something that was his family.
I think it's like the first pictures he's seen of his like parents.
Is that
No,
his
he
first
saw him in the first movie in the mirror.
in the mirror,
Right.
in the mirror.
But
that
that was
was
first
the
like the
same image.
concrete pictures.
Right.
like,
Now he can hold
first
it.
possession-
Right.
possession.
Yeah, his first possession of that. And then it even shows, like, on his nightstand, he framed one of them, like, let me just remember my parents dancing, and I thought that was really sweet.
I think Hagrid's very high. I think Hagrid's very appearance, he's solid, and he's solid in his personality as well.
Mm-hmm. Is that a Whomping Willow t-shirt you're wearing?
Oh no, this is a Linda Escher. See the
Oh,
horse? Can you see the horse in there?
yeah. So So Chris's aunt designed that shirt. That's really cool. No, it just reminded me of the Whomping Willow from, I mean, that comes up a lot in this one too.
You should order one of these then. We'll call it a
Yeah,
Whomping
yeah.
Willow horse shirt.
I feel that connection with Hagrid, we see that is Harry's family. I mean, he gets to go and like have tea with him, and he hangs out at his hut. And so I mean, they don't talk about any other kids going and having fellowship with Hagrid. I mean, that's like real communion there. He's always making him something. And whether the boys and Hermione like the food, sometimes in the books it'll say that they stuff it in their pockets, like they don't want to eat it, but they don't want to hurt his feelings. But it's still breaking of bread, and they're and Hagrid's creating that home atmosphere for Harry, and then even giving him that connection coming back home to the Dursleys on the summer. Now he's got this connection too. But you mentioned the mirror, because we didn't really talk about the mirror last week, and I thought, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in book one because everything's building the world for us. So we didn't get to talk about the mirror last week, but I think looking at Harry's greatest desires of his heart in that mirror, and then the same with Ron, and then Dumbledore kind of says, oh yeah, I would see socks. I would see myself wanting socks, which, is that a lie or is it true? I don't know. But looking at that mirror, and Harry wanting so badly to be with family, and now at least he has that little piece.
Dumbledore also had to warn him
Yeah,
to be careful.
right. You don't want to go chasing after memories and forget to live now. Yeah. So Harry does want to live in the present, even though he's got the album, because he wants to stay in communication with his friends, but nobody's writing him back, right? So whose fault is that? Dobby's fault. We have a Dobby figurine. Oh, hello, you swapped out again. So Dobby comes a-calling, and does anyone remember the first time you're watching it or the first time you read it and not knowing who Dobby was and just trying to think it through? Like, do you remember what your first thoughts were on who Dobby was or why he was showing up? I mean, if it was a long time ago because you've been watching these for years, I know that might be hard to remember. Mom, you saw it recently. Who'd you think it was? Oops.
I was unhappy with Dobby, to be honest with you. I
At the
thought he-
beginning?
Well, I thought he was such a stinker. I thought, oh my gosh, what is this thing doing?
Why does he keep hurting himself, the poor thing, right? I was so confused on why he would keep hitting himself against the dresser and
Right.
kind of beating himself up.
And
That's his self-punishment.
yes.
And it goes on to that, you know, anytime that anybody disagrees or he's got some trouble, like, but
Yes, Terry, at times.
when he's there, especially like with,
You know, it's like, I was
house.
mean to Harry, but be nice.
he's there with Harry upstairs and everything.
Oh,
And he's
yeah.
got
The lamp.
I
No, and I'm thinking, no, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then Harry throws him into the
And then the
closet.
cupboard, yes.
And he can't keep it shut. And Vernon comes up and he just can't keep it shut. But yeah, Pam's saying that he seemed to have good intentions for Harry, but then he did things that were contradictory to Harry's health and his well-being, like the whole way through. So we don't have to just stay with Harry and Dobby's relationship on that first chapter, but let's go ahead and talk through Dobby's situation all the way through. Let's try that evolution of conversation, because I think if we can talk through that, we can talk through Lockhart dreamy Lockhart, and we can talk through,
Charming smile.
and then we can talk through Jenny. I think if we talk through each of the elements that pass through till we get to the end of the book, I think that might be a good way for us to organize our conversation today. So let's keep going about Dobby.
Dobby had knowledge that he wanted to partake to Harry, but couldn't because of his loyalty of who he was, as the house elf.
Right.
And that was the constant battle that Darby was fighting, trying to give information to Harry without actually breaking his own oath, I guess, too.
Right, yeah, he was on a spell. I mean, there was a spell put on him by the bond of master to slave, basically, yeah.
I love how Dobby revealed that he could be freed, why he could be freed, and what it took.
Through a simple gift.
Right,
And I think that was very instrumental in his actually receiving a gift, as meager as it was.
Well, I think if Dobby kept trying to convince Harry to leave the school, not go back to the school, because if Harry did leave the school, he would not have the powers and influences that were available at the school, and he would be susceptible
right.
to whatever powers outside.
Yeah. I don't know how much it gets brought up in the movie, but there's a conversation with Ron and Harry in the book. And we talked last week about how the Malfoy family thinks they're better than everybody else because they're the purebloods, but so are the Weasleys. They're pure blood as well. They just don't have as much money. And so they don't have as much clout in the community. But Ron, even though he doesn't dislike Dobby, he definitely looks down on house elves as far as rank and status goes. And so in the book, Ron is conversing with Harry about that, and that is not a prejudice that Harry has ever even known to have. Because at the beginning in the book and the movie, it says that Dobby is being asked to sit down on the bed. Who are you? Instead of what are you? He decided to ask, who are you? And that's in the book narration saying what Harry's thinking, but in the movie, it's harder to see that Harry was conflicted. Like, should I ask, what are you? Or who are you? But he says, who are you? So he's giving him personhood, even though technically Dobby is not a human. And Dobby has never been treated like this. And we talked last week about how Harry grew up away from all that, as Dumbledore said when he dropped him off on the doorstep. And so I wonder if Harry would even have sought the opportunity to give the sock, even if he had known the information, had he have grown up in a culture where he was raised to think that elves were lower than humans.
I don't think it would have made a difference to him.
Yeah,
Because Hagrid, although Dumbledore feels Hagrid is a worthy person, he's kind of on the side. You know, he's not really among the professors.
right.
He's the guy in the background. But to Harry, he isn't.
Mhm.
And I think Harry that's Harry's nature.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, that Harry doesn't do that to Hagrid. And in fact, Harry defends Hagrid over and over and is trying to find ways to, release Hagrid of this bad news. So yeah, I mean, let's think through Hagrid's side of the story. So Hagrid 50 years ago has a spider, and his spider causes him trouble, but not everyone is really sure if the spider was the trouble or if it was something else. So what's their solution? What does the Ministry of Magic do?
Get rid of it. Move it out of the way so it's not even seen or heard of.
And expel Hagrid.
And they expelled Hagrid, and then they snapped his wand. So last week I said we're going to be looking for brokenness throughout, because that's an element that I think is woven in many, many times. And so we know last book, we kind of were like, Hagrid alluded to it a little, like, oh yeah, I've got my umbrella, I light the fire. We're not really thinking about why Hagrid does or doesn't have a real wand. But now we know more about him and his wand.
I never would have thought of that.
When did they break his wand? I don't remember that. Was that in the beginning of the story or what?
Well, no, it was explained how when Lucius and the Minister of Magic show up at Hagrid's hut to talk about, you've got to get out of here, Hagrid, we're gonna send you to Azkaban and all of that, because the chamber had been reopened and they thought it was him 50 years ago, so they were just sending him away from the school again, thinking he did it again.
Like he's suspect.
Right, so they were just alluding to, like, you were kicked out last time, we took away your wand, and so, I mean, we see that he still has fragments of a wand, because it can do some magic with, lighting the fire or whatever, but it's not like he's sitting there using it like everybody else. So it must be different than the typical wand, is just what I assume. What are your insights on Hagrid's wand, Caitlin?
I mean, I'm pretty sure they snapped it once he got expelled, and he must have like put it inside the umbrella. But Hagrid's wand, I'm pretty sure it might have been on Pottermore. They cited that it was longer than the average like wand length because he's so like tall. So that must be why. Yeah,
Right.
that must be why it can conduct so well through the umbrella, because it has that size. And also like Ron's wand, when it got snapped, it could still perform magic because, and I'm assuming it's due to like the core, it still works for him. It just functions through another conduit, takes extra effort.
Yeah.
And not very well.
Yeah, not, he won't be dueling anyone, but
So we can get into Ron's story here in a little while, but I do have Spello tape over there on display tonight.
Is that what he used to repair his
He
wand?
did,
Okay.
he wrapped it up
I
with
saw him
Spello.
tape
remember
it.
they look like regular tape.
It was, yeah, in the movie, it's like regular tape, but in the book, they call it Spello tape, yeah.
It reminded me of like taping your glasses,
Uh-huh.
right?
Which was what was wrong with Harry's in the
Right,
first
yeah,
book, yeah.
right.
And again, they snapped when he
When
put
he
it
went
in the wrong side.
diagonally instead of Diagon Alley, right?
Yeah.
It's funny how the alleys are like puns, because Diagon Alley is diagonally, Nocturne Alley is nocturnally.
That never clicked for me until today.
You mispronounced.
Yes, he
Yeah.
didn't enunciate.
Yeah. And he ended up in the wrong.
Wrong side of
With
town.
with broken glasses.
Yeah, well, I remember my first time watching through and Hagrid being in Nocturne Alley when Harry's trying to find his way out, really being that moment of, oh gosh, maybe Hagrid is dodgy. Maybe there is something going on.
What's he doing there, right?
Right, so when I'm watching the first time through and I see that, and then they get to the memories of Riddle, and he's saying, Hagrid, you've released this monster. I know you didn't mean to do it on purpose. I was like, oh gosh, maybe that is the direction the story's going, that Hagrid's not who we thought he was.
I just thought Hagrid wanted to have a drink and it couldn't happen any other place.
Yeah, well, he did say he was trying to get flesh-eating slug repellent, because they were
Yes.
eating all the school cabbages, right? So I guess he was just doing that. So Hagrid gets banished to Azkaban, and Harry's over here in his invisibility cloak, listening in the corner. And so what do we find out next? What happens with Harry and Ron? What do they hear him say?
All the spiders.
All the spiders, amazing.
I saw the trail of spiders.
I was looking for a trail of spiders.
There's some over there, they're just spiders. Yeah, I made a trail of spiders. So I started with the tiniest ones. What? Oh, that's nice.
No, it's okay.
I started with the tiniest spiders, and then I did a medium size, and I did a bigger one. I did not have an Aragog sized spider, sorry to make that.
Woods.
He's in the woods, yeah, he's out there. But what do they find out from the trip into the woods? One, we find out Ron's petrified of spiders.
Rightfully so, I think, right?
But he still stayed.
He did. He did.
Not the dog.
No, the dog was scared.
Thing.
Yeah. And they get a lot of information, but yet still there's pieces that they're not understanding. This is all just like, this one still has a lot of childlike sleuth work, right? We're still trying to piece together a lot. I mean, they start getting darker as we get into the next one and the next one and the next one. But in this one, we're still seeing a simple whodunit kind of story. And we've got a few suspects here. And so they come out of the forest with a little bit of confidence, right? They're ready to acknowledge that it's not Hagrid, but who is it? And at this point, Harry has already read the diary, but he's not necessarily suspecting Tom because Tom's gotten a special award from the school. But there's something up with this diary because why else would it have ended up in the school? So Harry's just kind of a little bit confused. So I said I didn't want to forget Quidditch, but I also don't want to forget Mr. Weasley's car.
How cool is that,
So what symbolism do you see with the Weasleys and that car and Mr. Weasley's interests and everything?
It gave the boys a chance to still get to the castle. And I think the idea is that they were gonna leave the car there for mom and dad to take it back to Muggle Land or wherever their house is. It didn't quite work out that way, but I think that was their thought train because they've missed the train. And you can do now.
Right,
They weren't deterred by missing the train.
yeah.
Well, the car freed Harry from the house.
Right.
And the car got them to Hogwarts. The car saved them from the spiders, right? I mean, it was kind of like the knight in shining armor every time.
Right, there were 3 major events. Yeah, and I mean, each time the car kind of got less and less perfect too, because the invisibility booster stopped working. And then we had the issue with the Whomping
I
Willow.
was gonna say the tree really did a number on it.
Really did a number on it, yeah.
Had no control of that car. It started just driving wherever it wanted to.
Yeah, yeah.
Freaked them out totally.
Right. And then coming out of the forest, it's like, it's one last hurrah to get them safely back to the school.
The car kicked them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to the woods.
I think that this is a moment to bring up how interesting it is that these books and movies spend so much time on kids wanting to learn and kids doing school. You know, a lot of other movies or books that are set at a school don't necessarily spend so much time on the school stuff. You know, like if you see an old sitcom with teenagers in it, somebody slams their locker and then they just have a conversation in the hallway. There's not really a lot of learning going on in the show, Boy Meets World or whatever, like shows that kids are in school. But in here, they're learning to be wizards. They are trying to continue to improve, like in everything. I mean, they're going to the library at their lunch breaks because they're trying to figure out what's going on with this, what we find out later, this big snake, this basilisk, but they're trying everything they can to get better. There's an after-school club to learn how to duel better, and they go. I mean, these kids are genuinely wanting to be better witches and wizards. They are trying to do this thing right. And whatever that motive is, I mean, for Malfoy and maybe some of the others who have Death Eater parents that we find out about later, like some of them, it could be because they just want to make sure that there's enough people on their side. Harry, he's just trying to like carve a name for himself out of whatever he's expected to be, and Ron is trying to, you know, not be the worst Weasley. You know, they're all trying to make their way. And then Hermione, we talked a little bit last week, and so I want to transition to talking about her a little bit and a little bit more about the school and learning situation, because we mentioned last week about Hermione being a Muggle born, then that she has no magic in her family, and her having to work twice as hard to try and overcome those obstacles, and that having to do with like privilege in the lives of those that are purebloods that have always just known magic, even if they didn't practice it until they got to Hogwarts, they at least knew about it. And then here Hermione's trying to like rise up and figure out how to have a place in her society. And yet there's people like Malfoy who are causing angst by using foul language to refer to her with derogatory terms, and professors that maybe don't have the best interest at mind for everyone. I mean, 'cause we have like the tension with Professor Snape at this point and all of that. So let's talk a little bit more about the learning process and some of this haves and have-nots within the magical community.
My first thought was, how did Hermione even know about the school? How did she get an invitation to go? So she must have had some kind of thought train about this, and I don't see it revealed anyplace
Right.
where it says that, somebody said, oh, I think we ought to get Hermione in here, let's send her an invitation. Nobody did that or said that.
Well, we
Okay.
have a few clues. So we know that because Harry got warned, magic was done at your place of residence on this night because Dobby sent the cake down on that guest. So we know that there's an awareness, there's some sort of radar at the Ministry of Magic about underage magic. And we also know from books anyway, well, and Hagrid said it to Harry at the, when they were on the hut on the rock, when they were trying to flee from the letters. Hagrid says to Harry, well, have you ever done anything that you couldn't explain? And that was your magic. So we can assume that Hermione was showing some of those signs as a child, and that the radar came up, oh, there might be a witch in this address, and then they pinged it on their map or whatever. And Harry got a letter, but later we find out that there's other students who come from Muggle or orphaned homes that get visited by Hogwarts professors. So we can assume that that type of thing must have happened to Hermione. I'd like to think it was Professor McGonagall that went to but I don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, we can assume that she was visited in her home and that this was explained to her parents. And she's not hiding it from her parents because they showed up in Diagon Alley.
There, you saw them talking to Mr. Weasley.
Who's completely obsessed with Muggles. It's like the complete opposite of the Malfoy family.
Rubber duck.
About the rubber duck, he said,
Yeah.
tell me, Harry, what is the purpose of a rubber duck?
I wanted to buy one and then I just never got a chance to go.
I have
buy one. Yeah. What is the purpose of a rubber duck? Yeah. So here he has this, and I feel that that's a place where children's literature and, oh, Frank joined us, hello. Children's literature has these gaps in it in a way, because you just think like, okay, Mr. Weasley, can you not just remember how to pronounce Muggle words? Or if someone told you about the rubber duck, can you not remember it till the next conversation? Like it's like they are completely disconnected from the Muggle world, and he just like has this amnesia whenever it's time to like think of something Muggle again. Like he can't remember it at all. Cannot process eccentricity. How he pronounces it in the book. Like he can't remember how electricity works. So I mentioned a lot of things a minute ago, and then we it's hard to stay on a topic because the movie has lots of
There's so much
directions to
going
go.
on.
But I was saying how Harry has these relationships in his life that have different elements of privilege or less status, and dealing with Malfoy calling Hermione a mudblood, or Ron not really being very accepting of a house elf, and that kind of thing. So is there any more conversation related to the kind of blood status, I guess, that you've picked up on so far? Quidditch falls in that, sure.
I don't have anything to say.
Oh.
You just wanted to talk about Quidditch.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess because I said that, oh yes, Quidditch can fall into that because that's where this conversation happened that I was thinking of when Malfoy is getting upset. What?
I thought you were gonna say when Malfoy is the new seeker.
Yes, I feel like a big surprise, right? I
Right.
mean, everyone seems kind of shocked. Wasn't Harry the youngest? Seeker?
Well, Malfoy's the second year, which is pretty
So
normal.
that's kind of normal.
Yeah, because
okay.
it's only first years that aren't allowed to have their own brooms, but as soon as you hit second year and up, it's like fairly normal to try out for your teeth.
So that's not an odd
The
thing.
thing with Malfoy is he bought his,
Boy.
yeah, he bought the
Okay.
entire team.
Well,
the
that's
new-
a class
the new
thing.
Nimbus brooms.
Right.
But it shows that he's not very good.
Yeah, he's like,
Can't see
he's
it.
a mediocre seeker.
But he funded the
Yeah,
team,
which
so
is
he
why-
got to have the prize position, I guess,
And
right?
I feel like Seeker was specifically chosen by him because Harry was Gryffindor's
Right, he
Seeker.
wants
He
to
wants to
be-
be Harry's schoolboy rival.
Sure.
Draco
Yeah, that
really
makes
thinks
sense.
he's like really big and bad, almost.
I also thought there was an undercurrent with the rivalry with Harry and Malfoy. While he competed with him, I always had the undercurrent that given the opportunity, Malfoy would not be who he is.
Yeah, he definitely could have had a redemption arc. And because
It seemed like every time the kid was trying to pull himself out of that, his parents would kind of like push him right back.
Sure.
Right there.
Yeah,
I think Malfoy is jealous of him. Extremely.
Which is an odd position to be in, I think.
Well, everyone
But
loves
he-
Harry,
But
right?
he sees Harry getting all the, not all the attention, but he gets away with a lot of stuff. And,
does.
yeah.
yeah.
He's not doing all kinds of
It's
things.
because the people that are in charge basically are on his side, and Malfoy is jealous.
Yeah.
Because Malfoy's family has money and status, etc., and Harry is a nobody.
And what we see from the first two books, Malfoy's only ever around Crabbe and Goyle. Like those are like Harry has Ron and Hermione, who seem like such like true like good friends, and Crabbe and Goyle are just like seem so like almost brainless because like Draco even asked them like, I didn't know you could read.
Yeah.
Right, that true friendship, right?
So he's been around money his whole life. He's spoiled by his parents, but it's not like he has any like real connections outside of that. While
Maybe
Harry-
that's what he's jealous of.
Yeah, he might be jealous of like the friendship that Harry has.
he has an entourage
Right.
Yeah.
that is attached to him because of his money
His
and wealth.
status.
Power.
Malfoy wasn't doing a lot of magic in the beginning. He was just having a sassy mouth.
Right.
He wasn't trying to do things behind his back. He was just talking down to everybody and try to use that.
Yeah.
Use his father as the big threat. My father will hear about this.
Yeah.
He has no real like standing for himself. He has to use what his family has as his form of power.
Right. Well, and that's even where his friends come from, because we find out in the fourth movie that Crabbe and Goyle's parents are also teaming up with Malfoy's side. So like they're already kind of like anti-good side kind of people already. And so they were fighting with Voldemort in the first battle, and when Harry's dad and mom died. And so yeah, I mean, his friends are coming from his parents. He's not even making new buddies when he gets to school.
They're
Why
getting
would they follow
grandfathered in.
Malfoy?
What?
Why would they all want to follow Malfoy knowing the snot that he is?
Powerful.
You know, they saw both sides, and they chose to go with him.
It's the family influence. It's because his dad is very influential in the ministry. So it's that almost like political influence that his family holds. It's very like powerful in the Wizarding world.
And money,
Yeah.
which
Very
bought the rooms and also, I mean, the power he has at the school. They talk about when Hagrid gets pulled away from Hogwarts, Malfoy's talking about, I'm the school governor, like I'm on the board of the school governors or whatever.
And at the end, doesn't Dumbledore say, didn't I hear that you were threatening people if they didn't side with you? Since he was
Yeah,
making
that's
threats against
pretty,
them.
it's a pretty like throughout the whole series, you'll see Lucius Malfoy being very aggressive with this, because unlike Draco, who makes very empty threats, Lucius Malfoy like everyone knows that he has
the
the,
power.
yeah, he can actually follow through with what he says.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what I think is kind of the main current of these books is power versus like, I don't know, I guess love. You know, that you have all these characters that are chasing after power, and you have these characters that are chasing after love. You know, and Harry was protected by love, but like the Malfoys and Voldemort are all about power. And, you know, and I think
Power and control.
power and control. And I think that's, you know, that's definitely something I really resonate with the stories with. You know, I try to talk a lot about power and how it just corrupts. Yeah.
Yeah, there's reference in the movie or in the book where Harry has to go to the Ministry of Magic. So there's reference to this statue, and when you're in the scenes of the Ministry of Magic, you can see the statue, but they don't really describe what's on the statue in detail in the movie. But in the book, it explains how the statue is called the Statue of the Magical Brethren. And it has wizards at the top, and then under that are goblins and house elves and things like that. And centaurs, yeah. And so, so the magical creatures that are less than human, so to speak. And so the statue is set up in that way. And when you toss a coin into the machine, or when you toss a coin into the fountain, like you would, the proceeds go to St. Mungo's Hospital of Magical Maladies and Injuries. So the coins that are donated to the statue go to a good cause, but the message behind the statue may not be the best message when you're thinking about how, from Harry's point of view, freeing Dobby and wait, why don't goblins have any more rights than they do, or whatever. That's an interesting message to portray. And I see, you know, Ron's family maybe having some of those prejudices that are not impacting their life too much, but in Malfoy's situation, they're impacting his life quite a bit by him feeling that he's better than non-wizards, and definitely better than, as Hermione's called, a mudblood.
What's interesting, I didn't know that about the statue. And like the easy ones to pick on is how like statues and iconography get used, you know, in our day and time. Like you think of like the regimes, like North Korea is the easy one to pick on, you know, where you have like a massive statue towards the dear leader, you know, type of thing. And that's meant to derive power and then it's like you have the top and then you have the underlings. You know, it's not like something that's lifting everybody up.
Yeah.
And that's I didn't realize that about that statue. It only gets worse too as you can progress through the books.
Right, and they do make reference in
No.
the eighth movie, that statue that I just mentioned is replaced by a more heinous statue. So we can get into that later, but even that statue becomes even more egregious than the one that I just mentioned. So.
Well, and by the time you get to Order of the Phoenix too, like the ministries become very fanatical in the power.
So obsessed
They're
with.
just trying to
Yeah,
grasp
I don't
it.
think you like get far out. I didn't realize that about statues. That opened up a world for me just then in these books.
Also with the statue, it's like mentioned how all the creatures are looking up at the wizard like reverentially, like they're like adoring the wizards, when really like the goblins seem distasteful at best towards wizards.
Yeah.
And it just shows in like an inaccurate representation how the wizards think that everyone like looks up to them because they're like the most powerful. But really, if you look at how like the other like species really view them, it's completely different than their perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting with the statue thing, and I don't know all the details around the book, but we're studying the book of Daniel in our small group. And I mean, that Daniel's visions were all about a statue.
Yeah, it represents the power of Babylon. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
the other kingdom is going down. I mean, the Medo-Persian and Greek and God spelled it all out. So I think that it's an interesting that there was a issue with a statue. So anyway, carry on.
Right. Well, and I mean, that was where I was going, not with Daniel, but with some of the, Bible references that in Job, it says, God shows no partiality to nobles, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. And I mean, Jesus was extremely, aggressive towards like, yes, I'm going to say, come to me, come to me, come to me, all of you who are on the margins and are not able to be part of the in crowd, like especially with, the Samaritan woman at the well, or anyone who was on the fringes, someone who had leprosy, or someone who was begging because they were blind and they couldn't get up and work, or lame, and that kind of thing. I think that him doing miracles for Gentiles as well as for Jews, I mean, that really brought about a message of saying, I'm for everyone. And I feel that that's the biggest message that starts to be obvious in book 2, in movie 2. And in the first one, I mean, it comes up some, but it's more obvious now as we're getting into, unfortunately, because the author is human. We're not saying all Slytherins are bad, but she often spends a lot of time focusing on the Slytherin house and its morals. And there was a rift, as Professor McGonagall explains, when they say, well, what happened to the Chamber of Secrets? And McGonagall says, well, there were 4 founders of our school, and eventually they kind of had a rift because one of them said, we really only need to let purebloods in to our school. And so I think that that's contrary to the gospel message. And then that's also contrary to what Harry's trying to do too. I mean, he doesn't want these non-magical or these muggle-born wizards to not be available at his school. He loves Hermione. She's an excellent witch. And yet she doesn't come from blood status like Draco does.
So something with Slytherin and the fight that happened between the founders is that you also have to consider the time period that Hogwarts was built. And this was during like when the witches were being burned and like muggles weren't very clean. Like the general population of England was not educated. They were unhygienic. So you have to consider also that maybe allowing the Muggleborns into the school was posing a danger because witches and wizards were being burned during that time. So
it was at their transition of going more into hiding.
Yeah. So especially because in like one of the like additional books that J.K. Rowling has, The Tales of Beedle the Bard, there's mention that Dumbledore writes in like one of his afternotes that talks about how like Hogwarts was built during like such a dangerous time for wizards and witches because like their children, like especially because like adults knew like spells that could prevent themselves from like burning up, but the children, it was very dangerous because they didn't know any of those spells. So not a lot of Muggleborns could have been just a safety concern purely, and not just like a complete prejudice thing.
Right. Well, I think of traditions, or I think of things that start out with good intention and then become a tradition that you don't know the root of. So that in that case, that makes sense. But if over the generations, they continue to then fuel that hatred.
When it wasn't dangerous. Yeah.
And I think of like for example, like to bring back the topic of the statues, I mean, that's happened in our history as humans that, you'll idolize one way of thinking and then maybe with a statue, and then you realize the error of your ways in future generations, and you're like, oh, we shouldn't have done that. And the same would be true for like, why do we do the things that we do? I mean, I think of like the candles on the altar too, because I mean, we have electricity. We don't technically need those candles up there. But their purpose initially was so that the Eucharist could be seen from the back of the church in a dark cathedral pre-electricity. But because we have the candles up there, when would you ever take the candles down? Well, never, so we just left them up. So they're still there. They don't have to be there for any religious purpose. Their initial purpose was just to see the communion, but we've kept them. And so I think that in that case with there's good intention behind a rule at the beginning, maybe, whether it's right or wrong, it's like has good intention. And then it kind of gets swayed by history and people taking it to the extremes.
If we could just jump back for a minute.
Yeah.
On the goblins being considered less than wizards. I drew a parallel between the Christians' attitude towards Jews.
Oh,
Because the Jews were the money lenders.
yeah.
And that was one of my first thoughts when they presented Gringotts. Here they feel these people are below them, but it suited them to use them for their banking,
Yeah.
which was basically how Europe reacted to the
That's
Jewish
interesting,
population.
yeah.
There's been a lot of like talk about J.K. Rowling's like themes of anti-Semitism throughout the books because of the goblins, like how she depicts the goblins as being like hook-nosed and money-hungry. It's like it fits in with a lot of negative stereotypes about Jewish people.
Like
Yeah,
Dickens.
yeah, it would.
But yes, but I see that if you're going to depict something like that in fantasy fiction, and in the end, the goblin is, empathized by Harry. Like he wants to elevate them, he wants to help them. So to present something in a negative way, but then the protagonist is in favor of that thing, I feel like that can be a good thing because it can be used to redeem. Well, it's just used as a tool to explain, hey, maybe we shouldn't be so anti-Semitic or whatever. Because I mean, there's still a lot of people in that world who don't like the goblins or don't trust the goblins. Even Bill, who's the brother of Ron, doesn't really love the goblins. He doesn't understand them. And he's worked with them for years. He explains that in the 7th one, but the goblins, and I intended today to be kind of a broad picture because we've talked about a lot of classes of people and creatures during this time. But I think that using that imagery of whether she intended it to be Jews or just to be a race of people that are different than the wizards. I think that it's still a good story to show how Harry brings on compassion for the house elves and the goblins eventually. But in this book, especially, we get the house elf because poor little Dobby gets vindicated in the end. Should we talk about Quidditch a little bit more at all? Does it interest anybody? I find that after this one, we really only see Quidditch one more time. I mean, we don't see Quidditch a lot later on.
It's more mentioned in the books too.
Yeah.
Like even in like the early ones, there's a lot more Quidditch themes. Like that's Harry's like big interest.
Yeah.
Well, in the movies, it's definitely more like plot focused because the books can take time and like specify like details like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Quidditch can be described in a lot of pages, but then just zip around on the broom for 2 minutes on the screen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it would take a while to describe it in the book.
What are the themes? Like you're gonna talk about like social orders and stuff like that with Quidditch. You have not talked about it yet.
No, you said that.
No, you said that.
Oh, I was saying that we didn't talk about Quidditch last time, so remind me not to forget to talk about Quidditch this time because we missed it.
Let's talk about it.
But I'm trying. I don't have anything interesting to say about Quidditch, but I hated to not let Quidditch be a topic that comes up if someone else wants to talk about Quidditch. I don't like sports that much.
But it's right, it seems very important to the sport. Every professor is there, they're up in the bleachers, it's this huge stadium.
The thing with Quidditch is it's their one sport that they play because like in like additional books and stuff, it mentions like the American school plays a game called Quad Pot, and so Quidditch is like their sport, like that's their thing. And all the professors, because there's like the Quidditch Cup, like the Quidditch House Cup, so all the professors, it's like bragging rights to have the Quidditch House Cup. And it's always been like traditionally.
It
like,
seems
a
very
serious
important to
game.
the school, whoever
It's almost like
wins.
America, it's like a high school football almost.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
Doesn't Harry see the trophy of his father?
right.
Yeah.
So it becomes, I don't know if you would say an obsession for Harry to be good at it. But he sees the trophy for his father, so now he has something.
Right.
In common.
Well, before
right?
that photo album, that was his first grasp of something about his family, was seeing his dad's name on that.
His
And that
dad
plaque.
was a seeker as well,
Yeah.
right? So that really resonates with him, I'm sure.
I kept it close to the
referee.
Right.
the book that Madam Hooch is the referee.
Madam Hooch.
Yeah, she's the,
Yeah, she was supposed to be the referee, but she didn't.
She
do
said
much.
she didn't show up, yeah, she just kind of lets it happen. I think there's over 700, it might be like 760 Quidditch fouls, like, that are technically registered. So there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong that results in a foul.
I have a question about the Quidditch game in this movie where Dobby has, I guess, put a spell on
The Bludgers.
Okay, why is it Hermione that stops it and not one of these adults?
The adults don't like, you'll notice throughout the entire Harry Potter series that the adults don't like to do much.
Here's poor Harry, and he's about to be bludgered to his demise, and it's
like fun.
and they're all watching, and watching Dumbledore's here, everyone is here, and it's Hermione that saves him.
A lot of times at the Harry Potter series, the adults, like, we'll just kind of let the kids do whatever. Like, don't push Harry in favor of just letting.
That was one question I'm thinking, well, I'm glad Hermione did it, but where
Where were the adults?
Die, nothing is gonna happen.
Harry looked like he was struggling a little bit there.
He didn't die though, so that's all that really matters.
Thanks to Hermione again.
Well, and goes and messes it up even worse. Yeah. So with Lockhart, he's a fraud, basically. We figured that out. But when do we figure out that Lockhart is a fraud? Do we?
But he lets the fairies out.
Okay, so that's when you figured out.
Yeah, he couldn't control it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And all the women were swooning.
Yeah. So that's when Judy figured out that he was a fraud.
He's a flim-flam man.
Well, did anybody else figure it out earlier?
Or a different time, yeah.
He was a good-looking guy, and he had a good story, but it didn't.
Yeah, quiz is a big one. Like, he's supposed to be this great defense against the dark arts like person, and yet his quiz is about like his favorite color, and it's just a lot of
about
like,
him, right?
yeah, it shows how much he values like his own fame over.
Definitely did. Yeah.
Well, typically, their book list will be one book per subject. And then they're reading the Lockhart book list. Oh, Mom, this is gonna be expensive. I mean, it was like 5 books on this guy.
In the books, the first time they see Lockhart in person, he's wearing forget-me-not blue.
Right. Yeah. And so they get to the end, and I do want us to make sure that we talk about, the troubles of the Chamber of Secrets opening. So I want to make sure we get time for that. So we get Harry and Ron, who have been sneaking around and with Hermione, and then later Hermione's not part of this because she ends up getting petrified. But they're sneaking around, they're trying to figure out what's happening, while Lockhart is this fraud, and Dumbledore has been sent away, and they're just kind of in trouble here. They can't figure out what to do. People keep getting petrified. People keep becoming in danger, including a ghost, which that scares them, like nearly headless. What? But what the other tension that comes up is during the duel, when Lockhart and Snape are trying to teach these boys and girls how to manage trying to fence, yeah. And one, we realize that Ron has no useful wand because it snapped during the Whomping Willow debacle. And but we also realize, it doesn't say it's a deleted scene. So if you've seen the extended version, you see that when they're dueling, there's a boy who's there at the duel that it looks like the snake is going after. And that boy introduces himself to Harry in an extended scene where he's saying, I'm a muggle born. I was up for Eton, but I ended up coming here instead. So we find that out a little bit more of a glimpse of this little Justin Finch Fletchley boy in the extended scenes. They got cut from the theatrical release or whatever. But so that paints the picture to say that the snake is going after this muggle-born boy. Harry's talking to this snake and everybody's freaking out, right? But Harry doesn't even know he can talk to snakes, right? Okay, so let's journey down the conversation of Harry trying to figure out his way to solve everything and save the day like he did with the Sorcerer's Stone, because that's what happens in these books is Harry keeps saving the day, right? Even if he doesn't mean to get involved in everything. He just can't help it. Meanwhile, everyone kind of wonders if he's the heir of Slytherin. So Harry's looking at trying to frame Malfoy. Malfoy, we find out, is not it. And Harry might be it, even if he doesn't know he's it, because he can speak to snakes and he freaks out, right? So what stands out to you guys in that pathway? There's so many little plot lines in this book, for real. Yeah.
Harry was originally the darling, the boy, you know, and now all of a sudden people are saying, well, maybe he's not the good guy. And that actually affected Harry. He starts thinking to himself, maybe, you know, the hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. I talk to snakes. What if there's other things I do that I don't know? He's now questioning his own identity.
And the fact that he didn't realize he was speaking snake. And when he was told that, he thought, what, me? I was speaking to the snake? And it freaked him out.
Yeah. Or even, oh, go ahead.
Although he did mention the fact and everything there that back at the zoo.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
He did know it.
Yeah.
And then the snake thanked him.
Right. Well, and then he kind of dismisses it and says, well, can't a lot of wizards just talk to snakes? Like,
Yeah, sure, it's just an everyday thing.
not a common gift, Harry. No.
No, not like this isn't like spoilers, but like it draws parallelism to another boy 50 years ago who could talk to snakes, who thought the exact same thing. Yeah, it was common for him to be able to speak to snakes, and I think it's all these like muggle-raised children who don't know anything about the wizarding world, while the wizarding world kind of looks down on them for not knowing, even though they've never been told.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can't blame everyone for freaking out. Because the last person that said that could speak to snakes was Voldemort, and Voldemort always talked about him being the heir of Slytherin. So if I was an 11-year-old who'd grown up with stories of him, I'd be terrified of Harry too.
Yeah. Well, and likely not one of those kids had ever heard Parseltongue before.
Right.
Probably sounded foreign to them.
Yeah, and it sounds creepy, that's for
It
sure.
does. They made it really creepy.
They made it creepy.
Yeah.
Does that so well.
I was practicing that part. Yeah, and I think that when Harry, I think part of his desperation of, them making that polyjuice potion and them trying to frame Malfoy came down to the fact of it can't be me. I can't be the one that's causing trouble because I have no ill intent. Malfoy's the one with the ill intent. And the type of ill intent Malfoy has is much more shallow. We find out that the deep-seated hatred that comes out of Tom Riddle in that memory book, and when they end up confronting each other down in the chamber, that's so much more hatred and just craving of power that Chris was mentioning earlier, unlike anything Malfoy is going to be able to muster. I mean, we find in the end that the Malfoys, I mean, they can't shake a candle to the type of hatred that Voldemort has. They're at one point, they're just nope, done. drawing a line in the sand kind of thing. But I think that Harry's fear for evil that brought up last week is continuing to progress him towards having to find out this chamber secret. And not only that, but Hermione, I mean, it's not just a bunch of random people on campus that have been affected. It's his great pal. But I do recognize that he had the intent of saving people even before it was someone that really impacted him. What do you think of that turning point when McGonagall does tell them that it is Hermione that's been petrified, though? What does that moment do for the plot line that's different, though? I don't think it changes Harry's motivation at that point, but what does it change?
It makes it a lot more urgent, like their friend has been petrified and now like Harry's already planning to do it, but now it becomes like he needs to find out, like it's a must, it has to happen like immediately. So they can't just leave Hermione there and not know.
He's obsessed with it.
Yeah, it becomes his like one thought in his mind is finding out what happened to Hermione.
It's bigger risk.
Yeah.
Once
Yeah.
Hermione gets it.
Yeah. Nothing else matters
He
then.
stops thinking about things and just like jumps into action. This is very, very much a Gryffindor trait for him.
I think they realized that Hermione was very close to coming to see something or must have saw something that obviously petrified her.
The mirror.
Right,
Yeah.
so they know that she was on the
And
trail.
she had the paper in her hand and the mirror.
Right.
Yeah. But they didn't find the paper right away.
So she had something, right? You see her hand like curled around something, but.
I think Harry also realized, and Ron did too, at that point, just how much they depended on her intelligence.
Right.
That suddenly, part of the puzzle wasn't there. You know, it was the three of them always throwing their ideas into the hat, and suddenly they were left without her. And I think that panicked them to a degree.
Yeah. But I do think that by Hermione being one of the victims, it freed Harry of that doubt that I think he was feeling a little bit self-conscious maybe with his community at school, because he was still seen as likely that heir of Slytherin. And I think that some of that reckless attack on, yes, we're going to figure this out, transitioned for him, because at that point he had nothing else to lose. And he also felt a little more confident that like maybe people actually believe that I'm not the one. And so I can just unabashedly do what I need to do to take care of this business. Because, I mean, he wouldn't have petrified his own friend, he would assume.
Right.
Everyone knows how much Harry, Ron, Hermione were close, like they were the trio.
So Lockhart has no skills except memory charms. And Lockhart is ready to leave the school. And I think it's such a funny scene. And I didn't catch on to this in the first time I was watching these long ago. I was thinking that as the watcher, that we were supposed to catch on to the fact that Lockhart was a fraud, but that the professors didn't necessarily know it. Like, I just didn't get that right away. And so when McGonagall says to him, well, Lockhart, weren't you just saying the other day that you know where the entrance to the chamber is? I was not seeing that as, okay, let's just get him out of the way, like they were. But he goes and he's trying to just pack up his stuff to get the heck out of there when Ron and Hermione show up to say, no, that's my sister in the chamber. We're gonna go get her. So, so what do we, when I think of their entry into the chamber and they're like, you go first, and they push him down in there. And the trouble happens though, because he ends up with Ron's wand. And so with this brokenness idea, and I want to end on this, Harry has had things broken, his family, his glasses have been broken, but Ron has functioned all year with this broken wand. He's in a family with this blood status, but they're not really that well accepted in their community. His father doesn't have the most prestigious job. There's a lot of kids, so they have a lot of mouths to feed. Ron can't just call and ask for a new wand. One, because his mother would be livid. You broke it doing something stupid. No, we're not buying you a new wand. And two, we just don't have the funds for you to have a new wand right now. So Ron's been dealing with the ramifications of this bad wand all year. But in this moment of terror, when they're stuck down in here with this snake, they don't even know what they're about to face. They have this professor who's a fraud, and that professor is ready to just ruin their lives, because that obliviate charm just sends you into, you know, complete isolation from your old self. It backfires. And I just think how Ron has this opportunity all through this book of just being so frustrated, and yet it's turns in his favor in the moment when he needs it. And what does that say for any of you?
Well, they have to rely on Ron because he's the only one that can get out. And he comes through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, it's oftentimes we throw away the things that we deem broken. And with this one, it's the broken things it's actually saving them.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, is a strong theme.
Yeah. And the same happens, you know, a minute later, where Tom Riddle, they're faced, Harry and Tom are faced with one another, and the snake is there, and Dumbledore's bird, Fox, sends this broken, gross hat. No, the hat's not broken, but the hat's all grubby, and Tom's like making fun of the hat, and yet the hat produces the one thing that they need in that moment too, to help defend him against that snake. And so I think Harry also has been hurt by this conflict of, am I Slytherin truly, or is it okay that I'm in Gryffindor? And when he does find out that that sword is Gryffindor's sword, I think that's one more layer of confidence for him, that he does belong. I think he's just been so conflicted with split personality and split motives and split background, and he just doesn't feel whole. He feels broken. I think he feels split into two. And I mean, for good reason, we'll find out more later, but I think knowing that he can identify with the Gryffindor community does give him confidence to continue on and be part of that family in the future. Well, we didn't really talk about Ginny.
No.
There's too much to talk about.
There's so much.
There's too much to talk about. But
But she had a crush on Harry.
Yeah, from the
From the
first day.
get-go. So
And she
I-
comes, yeah.
When she comes down those stairs.
She comes down.
Turns out it's a Jenny's line.
It was definitely a very shallow crush. She had a crush on the boy who lived, not
Right.
Harry himself.
The celebrity of
Yeah.
Harry.
That's
the
like-
way the mother had the crush on Lockhart.
Right,
Yeah, it's like-
exactly.
You know, at that time, Harry must have been known by everybody. So he was familiar to the family.
Yeah, but like the thing is, like there was even like books written on Harry, but he grew up away from like everything. He grew up in the Muggle world, so no one really knew Harry. And Harry himself is very different from like the hero, like the great boy who lived. Like
Right.
Harry just wants like
He
a
is just
family.
Harry.
Yeah,
Right.
he just that's all he wants to be.
Right.
Like, he just wants to be normal. So Ginny has this like almost hero worship of him, like this celebrity crush almost on
Sure.
Harry.
Exactly.
And that element of it for her, and going into school brand new, but being the only girl in her family, and being planted with this diary of, you know, Malfoy gets it into her little cauldron back at Flourish and Blots, and she pours her soul into this throughout the year, and that's, you know, what ends up causing all the trouble. I mean, the fact that she's forgiven at the end, that's important too. And so, I mean, we see how she and Harry continue on, but you know, I mean, it was okay. It turned out okay. It did, so. Thanks for joining.
Are we losing them?
Oh, I mean, well, I didn't want us to ever go past 5:15 just for people's time in the evenings and things, so. Yeah, it's 5:16, so please take a cupcake with you or take a little pan of shepherd's pie for later.
By the way,
Oh, yeah.
Mom, you can say something.
I got the
Here.
filling, oh, go ahead.
Mom, I said shepherd's pie. We missed out.
Yeah, the filling was a little salty, so then I just put less salt in the potato stuff. Yeah, I mean, they're tiny. They're like, oh, you can't see what I'm holding up, but like, you know, they're not very big.
You can do something.
Aw.
White on white. But yeah, it was fun. I couldn't find that size at the store by itself, so I bought the what was actually in them was those graham cracker shells that you can just do individual pies, and I dumped all that into one container.
all good.
That's dedication, Polly. When there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
We started making the joke at home, I live with Buddy the Elf. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are too.
This is why yeah, oh, so Cameron, did you make your comment at the moment when we were talking about the Quidditch accidents? I see you wrote failed pedagogy on this.
I don't know if you can. Can you hear us, Cameron?
Yeah, sorry, I got a cranky 1-year-old.
Oh, that's okay. But yeah, that when you put that on your comment, about Quidditch?
Yeah, that Hermione had to take care of the bludgeon, the bludger when
Yeah.
there's 100 teachers, adults hanging around. Failed pedagogy, failed pedagogy.
They're all standing around with their mind in neutral.
Or just even the system where we find out later on in future movies that like the students who need help financially get help, but why did no one buy Ron a new wand? Like,
You lost an entire year of education.
You could have bought the whole shop.
There's all on candies and
Why can't you fix the wand with another wand, right? Like Correcto Wando or Rivero Wando, right?
The wands are very like touchy, like they're
You
very.
can't just fix it.
No.
Okay.
You have, there's a reason, like, there's no reason that Ollivanders is the one.
That would have been my thought. Why
Ollivander
did
is
someone
the
just
one
fix
with
it?
fracture. It's like a specific art.
but we can spoil it for Ron in the next one. He does get a new wand when his father wins a contest, so he does get his new wand.
You heard that.
Are the swimmers?
The swimmers,
Yes.
the
I
fourth one,
forgot.
the fourth one?
the goblet of fire.
You're talking about when they go into the lake?
Oh, yes, you don't remember that? That was a very vivid.
Only
one.
remembers
No,
all.
I remember, I'm exactly, is that what you're talking about by swimmers? The one where they're competing and they have to swim in the lake? Yeah, that's the fourth one.
I don't know if we
2
have.
more weeks.
The fifth book is.
What's the name of that one?
Goblet of Fire.
Goblet of fire.
I don't know if we have. I might have to borrow yours.
The movie, we'll bring them in next week. I'll bring in the collection in case you need them and I'll just pass it to you.
Well,
'Cause
if it's
we have
this
them-
week, I have to go and see.
We have them on HBO, so we have them to stream, but I have DVDs.
That would be
Maybe
wonderful.
we can find them.
I'm waiting for week.
They are on HBO and,
We don't have
The
any.
email that we put through gave us the link and our username for you to watch our digital copies through.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's on, I think we can go in through Netflix.
otherwise I'll bring you the case because I do have those.
Order of the Phoenix is the best book.
Also, I did see an article that said they're all coming back to Peacock for free in October. So I know Lois, you had said that only a couple of them were there, but I
Yeah,
think
they
they're all.
went away. By
Yeah,
the time I was ready to watch them, they were already gone.
okay.
So I had-
Well,
I had to
read an
use-
article.
Yeah, I used yours.
Okay, so you got in on the
Yeah.
Voodoo.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had ours on Peacock, still.
Do you pay for a Peacock subscription?
No,
No, with
no.
Amazon.
Free.
It disappeared on mine too. He wasn't there anymore. Not even the first three.
Oh, now we got him.
Yeah.
Well, in the initial email I sent, there was instructions on how you can watch them on our Voodoo account. But if that doesn't work for you, Heather said she has a set. We do have a set of them, so physical ones if you're in town.
Which one, number 3 or 4?
Azkaban. Azkaban. And then I'm going to reset the calendar a little bit. We are going to go out of town on the first weekend of November, and so we will just pause, but that will still get us finished before Thanksgiving.
Okay.